A moon-white wind knifed through Dry Creek, driving shards of snow across the timberline. Ellie Hart leaned her full weight against a pine sled, boots vanishing to the ankle every step. The man lashed to the runners was dead weight, bigger than her, coat crusted with ice, blood soaking one sleeve black. She told herself he'd freeze solid if she stopped, so she didn't. Breath hitched, she pushed harder, lantern clanking on the sled's iron hook. Each gust snatched the flames sideways. The light kept jumping, like it feared what it showed. Her cabin door buckled inward at the last shove. She dragged him over the threshold and kicked the door shut, shooting the crossbar into place. Snow hissed on the hearthstones where it landed. No words, only the twin metronomes of her panting and the clock above the mantel. She knelt, knife flash cutting his shirt. Split seconds of assessment, shoulder through and through, high on the meat, no bone. Good. Worse was the fever-red stripe under the collarbone, blood poisoning trying to climb. She drew a kettle with one hand, seizing a pouch of crushed willow bark with the other. Movements brisk, practiced, no room for second thoughts. A spent rifle hung on the wall, David's. The stock still wore the gouge from the bullet that missed his heart by an inch. Ellie didn't look at it. Memory was a lantern she refused to light. She worked instead by touch and habit. Hot water, torn linen, a sewing needle passed through the flame. The man lurched awake when steel met flesh. No scream, just a guttural choke and words that scattered like nails across a floor. Survey maps, red pine stands, buyers back east. His eyes rolled white, unfocused. He grabbed her wrist, the grip barely stronger than a child's. Voss knows, can't let. The rest dissolved into a cough thick with irony, Raider begging mercy from a widow. She said nothing. Words wasted breath. She stitched, he shivered. When the knot tied, she forced laudanum between cracked lips. He tried to spit, reflex lost the battle, medicine went down. His hand sagged. She caught herself holding it an instant too long, then eased it onto the blanket. The clock ticked. Beyond the shutter, wind shook the cedar boards like an angry creditor. Footsteps crunched outside. Two silhouettes paused at her frosted window, Mrs. Sutter, lace bonnet, sharper than frost, and Tobias Pike, the preacher's nephew. Their faces leaned to the glass. Ellie didn't move, didn't blink. They scurried off, skirts and coattails whipping like frightened quail. The wind swallowed their voices, yet she heard them all the same. Widow alone with a stranger, after dark, door barred. Lantern drained low. She banked the fire, rolled her guest onto the cot, and slumped beside the stove. Dawn bled into the sky before her eyes closed. Church bell tolled 3 short peals, time for prayer or judgment. Ellie marched the single street into town, scarf pulled tight, footprints ghosting behind her in fresh powder. Heads turned, shopkeeper Fraser rearranging canned peaches he didn't sell in winter, seamstress McKee pretending to nail a sign she'd hammered yesterday. Ellie's heart pounded, but she kept her pace even. Dignity was armor. Inside the clapboard chapel, the pews were full, an audience hungry for a different sermon. Gideon Pike, she'd learned the name rifling his papers, sat in the front, wrists bound with twine. Fever glazed his eyes, yet he stayed upright. The circuit judge, Arlen Voss, occupied the pulpit. Bible in one hand, ledger in the other, gold watch chain draped like a serpent across velvet waistcoat. Candlelight glimmered off spectacles that magnified nothing but disdain. Prosecutor Devlin stood to speak. This community upholds virtue. A woman found in private company of a criminal is, by law and scripture, compromised. Her reputation, once soiled, soils the town. Ellie's jaw clenched. She said nothing. Her silence was a stone tossed in a pond. Rings of murmurs spread through the pews. Devlin gestured toward Gideon. Witnesses saw this man inside Mrs. Hart's home at an unseemly hour. She gave him shelter, food, perhaps more. Lars from the sawmill chuckled. Someone hissed him quiet. Judge Voss steepled fingers. Mrs. Hart, do you deny harboring this raider? She met his eyes. I deny nothing. The man was dying. Motives scarcely matter. Appearances do. Voss rose, black robes brushing the dais. Our fathers settled Dry Creek on moral bedrock. When that bedrock cracks, society collapses. He paused, letting the words weigh. Therefore, to preserve public decency, and given the man's confessed intent to repent, we pronounce a marriage, effective immediately. A gasp fluttered like startled birds under the rafters. Ellie stared, expression carved from granite. Gideon's shoulders sagged, a sardonic half-smile flickered, gone before daylight caught it. The judge droned vows. Ellie's mouth formed the words with the lifeless precision of a firing-line soldier. Gideon repeated them, voice frayed but steady. Devlin untied the twine, slipped a plain brass ring from a pouch, forced it onto Gideon's finger, then offered a matching ring to Ellie. She slid it beside the thinner band that once belonged to David. The metal felt colder than the storm she'd hauled this man through. Voss slammed his gavel. Done. Bible closed. Ledger remained open, a reminder of debts owed. The congregation shuffled, half relieved, half disappointed the scandal ended without blood. Gideon stepped toward Ellie. Sweat beaded his brow though the chapel was unheated. I'm sorry, he whispered. The words held no romance, only recognition of the cage they now shared. Save breath, she answered, low enough that pews couldn't eavesdrop. She gripped his arm, helping him stand. Outside, snow had ceased, sun glared off drifts, but air still cut. They walked past the mercantile where Mrs. Sutter watched, lips curled in sanctified triumph. Tobias Pike tipped his hat with mock gallantry. Ellie didn't break stride. She felt the weight of every gaze like buckshot in her back. At the hitching rail, Gideon staggered. She steadied him. He muttered, "Need to talk, when walls can't listen." She nodded once. Words later, right now survival. The road home stretched white and silent. Halfway, Gideon halted, leaning against a cottonwood. He drew something from inside his coat, a small leather wallet, damp at the edges. Opening it with shaking fingers, he revealed a dull nickel badge, Pinkerton embossed around a 5-point star. She stared, expression unreadable. "Raiders, cover!" he rasped. "Voss, forging deeds. Your land next." A cough racked him. Blood speckled snow. Ellie looked from the badge to the distant town steeple, then toward her cabin chimney, smoke curling thin against a pale sky. She slipped the badge back, closed his coat, and looped his arm over her shoulder. No words. Decision made in the space between breaths. Back in her yard, chickens scattered as they crossed the threshold. She guided him to the cot, tucked blankets tight. From the mantel she retrieved David's rifle cartridges, dropped them into an iron pot, lid clanging shut. Lock clicked. Gideon's eyes tracked the motion. He said nothing. She knelt by the hearth, fed logs to the flames. Fire popped, scent of pine filling the room. Outside, hoofbeats circled, some curious soul-verifying scandal's residue. Ellie placed kettle on the grate, water hissing. She felt the burn of watchers on her walls, the brittle peace of a town convinced virtue had been restored. Her fingers found the new ring. She twisted it once, twice, testing its weight. Gideon broke the silence. "Judge won today. Doesn't have to win tomorrow." She looked over her shoulder, ember light catching the iron in her gaze. "Tomorrow's another fight. Rest." No softness, yet something in her voice. Resolve, maybe mercy, cupped warmer than the fire. Clock ticked. Wind scraped shutters. On the table lay Gideon's blood-spotted maps, edges curling as they dried. Ellie reached, smoothed a corner, studying the ink lines that sliced through homestead borders like a surgeon's knife. For the first time since David's death, her heartbeat found a rhythm not set by grief but by purpose. Lantern flame steadied. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves in slow, deliberate beats. In the hush between them, the cabin seemed to breathe. One long, measured breath before dawn would ask what manner of marriage took root in winter soil and whether the valley's moral bedrock could bear the weight of truth. Dusk scraped orange across the ridge when Ellie bolted the cabin door, the clang echoing like an oath. Gideon leaned against the log wall, coat half-buttoned, eyes flicking over unfamiliar surroundings. Not a word passed. The hush felt crowded, hers with memories, his with secrets. She crossed the room, struck a match, and coaxed the lamp to life. A blade of warm light cut through shadows, stopping just shy of him, as if testing how much illumination he deserved. He pressed a hand to his stitched shoulder and breathed through gritted teeth. She poured water into a tin cup, added a pinch of willow powder, and set it beside him without comment. He stared at the drink, then at her. She noticed the mud on his boots, the faint tremor in his fingers, the way he pocketed a folded map when he thought she wasn't looking. Snowmelt dripped from the rafters in small, persistent taps. Ellie reached for a towel, dabbed droplets before they chased each other down the inner wall. Gideon's gaze followed her movements the way a man watches a fuse burn, aware time is short but unsure what explodes. "Town Brennan to know what goes on here," he said at last, voice scraped raw. "They can set themselves on fire for all I care." Her words were soft, almost polite, yet flint lay under every syllable. He took the cup, sipped, winced. "Why drag me out of that ravine? Would have felt the same hauling a coyote from a trap." She checked the stove, stirred embers until sparks swirled up the flue. No praise in her tone, but no contempt either, just a statement of duty. He studied her profile, the braid tightened near her nape, the faint pallor of exhaustion around her mouth. "Coyotes aren't forced to marry their rescuers." Her shoulders dipped a fraction, the smallest shrug in history. "Law is a greedy thing. Always wants payment." Wind rattled the shutter. Gideon's hand drifted to the revolver on the bench, an unconscious motion born of habit. Ellie followed the gesture, not the pistol, and unhooked a cast-iron skillet instead, filling the pan with lard and onions. Knife met board in steady rhythm. The scent rose comforting and sharp, threading through the tension. He breathed in, eyes closing a moment. "Smells like evenings back in the Michigan camps, before the syndicate took half the wages for security. No stories tonight," she said, though not unkindly. "Stories turn into debts once told." He accepted the rule, sat on a three-legged stool, watched her cook. The silence was not comfortable, yet it was honest. Both could feel it thicken when he slipped the folded paper from his pocket. He smoothed it on the table, an official-looking survey of the valley, neat ink lines slicing across familiar ridges. Red marks ringed her land in a lopsided rectangle. His finger rested on the outer edge. "That line's not yours," he said quietly. She kept stirring. "Judge claims river shifted, says deeds must too." "It didn't shift." He tapped the page. "He did. Fancy pen and city lawyer." Her spoon paused. Broth dripped back into the pot, punctuation far louder than words. She moved the pot to the cooler hearthstone, wiped her hands on her skirt, then reached into the cupboard and withdrew a narrow dispatch box. Tiny brass key turned with a dry click. She laid out yellowed documents like relics. Homestead grant signed by President Hayes, tax receipts, a marriage certificate bearing her dead husband's name. Gideon skimmed each, nodding once. "I can prove forgery," he said. "If I get those ledgers." "And if you don't?" She closed the box, steel in the action. "Town will hang me and bury you behind the churchyard." He met her gaze evenly. Fever gleamed but mine stayed razor bright. "Might hang us anyway. Difference is whether we give them cause worth hanging for." Footsteps crunched outside. Both froze. Lantern light cut across the crack under the door, slid away, came back, like a persistent thought. Ellie gestured for silence, crossed to the window, lifted the curtain half an inch. Mrs. Sutter, shawl bundled, stood in the snow clutching her Bible, lips moving as if reciting verse against corruption. Ellie dropped the curtain, counted to 10. The light retreated. Gideon exhaled. "Voss's choir doing their rounds." "They're wolves in bonnets," she replied, returning to the stove. She plated the stew, slid a bowl his way. He tasted and nodded appreciation without words. She ate facing him, the ticking clock dividing every bite into measured seconds. When the bowls lay empty, Gideon fished a pencil nub from behind his ear, flipped his map over, and sketched the courthouse ground floor from memory. "Vault door here, clerk's annex there." Ellie watched, spoon idle in hand. "Need another exit," she noted, tapping the south wall. Gutters drain to an alley, he said. Jumps 8 feet. 7 on the east side. Ground slopes. She rose, fetched charcoal, and shaded the correction. Their heads bent close over paper. Heat from the lamp joined the hush of shared concentration. At the overlap of lamplight, her fingertip brushed his. Either flinched, yet both withdrew a fraction later. Door hinges whined somewhere distant, perhaps only the wind. Gideon folded the map, slid it into his coat. Doc Fraser can smuggle laudanum-laced whiskey to the guard. But we'll owe him. We already owe everyone. She pushed back her chair, stood, and lifted the iron pot of used cartridges off the shelf. The lid clanged as she placed it on the table between them. So let's choose our creditors. He opened the pot, eyed the glinting brass. Respect lit his features. Divvying your last rounds is trust in my book. Not trust, she corrected. Practicality. Lead solves certain conversations faster than words. He considered, then sorted cartridges, lining 5 by the lamp. Keep 3, he said. I talk better knowing you've enough to stop me. Her lips curved, a near smile that never fully arrived. She scooped the spare rounds into her apron pocket. From the mantel she took a pencil stub of her own, flipped the homestead grant, and scribbled 2 names, Silas Breen, Josiah Ward. She slid it to him. Men who'll listen if shown proof. One's bitter about wage cuts, other's nephew lost land. Gideon folded the paper with care, tucked it with his map. We'll need 1 more set of hands inside the courthouse. Any you trust? Her gaze drifted to the stained windowpane, reflection of lamplight fractured by frost. Trust is for the dead. But my neighbor's boy is lithe, quick, and too nosy. Might steal his way under a door if paid in licorice. Licorice is cheaper than bullets. He grimaced as he rose, shoulder wound pulling. She reached instinctively, then withdrew. Instead she moved the chair, allowing him space to stand. He crossed to the cot, sat, unlaced boots with slow resolve. She knelt to stoke the fire, senses alert to every creak. Ellie, he said, voice low. She did not turn. Say what you came to. You saved me at cost to yourself. Whatever happens next, that debt lives with me. She stood, brushed ash from her palms, looked him square in the eye. Then live long enough to pay it. He lay back, exhaustion dragging lids shut. She trimmed the lamp wick, letting darkness pool in corners. Before dousing the flame, her glance fell on the brass ring gleaming against rough skin of her hand. She twisted it once, listening to the tiny metal rasp, then blew the lamp out. Night settled thick as wool. Outside, the town of Dry Creek slept uneasy, unaware that its ledger-keeper had just earned 2 new entries, names written in firm strokes by a widow with nothing left to fear and a Pinkerton raider who finally had something to live for. Dawn dragged a cold gray shawl over Dry Creek, smothering color and sound alike. Gideon limped through the vapor with a logger's hook slung over one shoulder, breath feathering in front of him. He wore a borrowed flannel, sleeves ripped for bandages, grime masking the Pinkerton edge. Ellie followed at a washerwoman's pace, bucket in each hand, bonnet hiding quick eyes that measured every door latch, every rifle leaning against the rail. The river's roar beyond the millyard covered whispers and missteps, but not hearts thudding against ribs. They reached the sorting platform where slabs of fresh-cut pine slid down greased runners. Gideon coughed, wincing, and leaned on the hook. A guard glanced over, dismissed him as another injured hire desperate for wage. Ellie set buckets beside a cauldron, dipped rag into soapy water, slung it over a beam, shoulders rocking in the steady rhythm of someone who'd scrubbed sweat stink before. Her gaze slid to the guard's schedule nailed crooked on a post, names, hours, initials. She counted silently, lips twitching once, then turned her attention to a blood-flecked saw blade. Steel hissed under her cloth. Gideon, catching the signal, adjusted his limp to match the interval between whistle blows, 3 seconds hobble, 2 seconds stop, always when the saw shrieked loudest. That way, conversation hid in machinery. Silas Breen strode from the mill office, coat unbuttoned, face carved from night's poor sleep. He paused by Gideon, eyes narrowing on the hook. Shoulder still crippled? Cuts deeper every pull, Gideon said, voice hoarse. Breen grunted, glanced toward Ellie. Keep wives away from the river after dusk. Logs break free easier than you think. He walked on, warning delivered without accusation. Ellie's rag stopped, squeezed foam into the air, then resumed. At noon the steam whistle screeched, workers scattered. Gideon shuffled toward the medicine tent, ducked under canvas. Ellie slipped behind, pouring soapy water onto the ice, making an excuse of spillage. Inside, Gideon rolled a barrel aside and lifted the floor plank beneath. He stashed a coil of rope and a stubby crowbar. Ellie tapped twice on the tent pole when the yard cleared, then vanished down the path with empty buckets, chin tucked low. No words had passed, yet the plan knotted tighter. Back at the cabin that night, maps covered the table like a gambler's spread. Gideon brushed sawdust from his cuffs and drew a charcoal line along the courthouse rear wall. Vaults halfway underground, stone thicker than a gilt-ridden pasture. One lock here, secondary bar here. He tapped. Worst noise risk is the filing racks, tin trays rattling. Ellie positioned a stub of candle to cast light on his sketch, then traced the alley gradient with her finger. Slope means east gutter sits lower. 7-foot drop, maybe less with drift. He smiled at the precision. You measure land by breadth. Survival's a yardstick, she answered, sorting rifle rounds by shine. She had cleaned each with lamp oil until brass gleamed like new coins. Gideon watched but said nothing. Respect lives quieter than praise. Wind rattled panes. He leaned back, shoulder throbbing. Breen's on edge. Ledger mentions his mother's farm. Voss grabbed water rights. If we show proof, he'll cut the saw-line. Ellie considered, lit her second candle. Proof first, saw-line later. Otherwise we hand a rumor to a man starving for certainty. They rehearsed hand signals, 1 knock on pipe for move, 2 for halt, 3 for run. They practiced the distance from vault to ladder, stepping length across the floorboards until Gideon's wound burned and Ellie's breath misted. At last she set kettle on the stove, poured tea, and sat across from him, shoulders squared. If something splits wrong, she said, sliding a folded parchment across the table. This deed keeps the land from probate. Witness signatures, county seal. He felt the paper's weight, softer than lead, heavier than iron. Bury it north of the apple tree, she added, if I don't walk out. He opened his mouth, closed it. Accepting contingency is harder than drafting strategy. He tucked the deed inside his shirt, skin prickling where it rested. Snow returned after midnight, cloaking tracks within minutes. Perfect camouflage for sabotage. Gideon and Ellie trudged to the riverbank, holding lanterns shaded with scrap tin. The booms chained across the current trembled under the burden of thousands of logs. Gideon unscrewed the first coupling pin, muscles screaming. Ellie loosened the second, jaw tight as the river pushed under the mass. When the last pin dropped, the raft shuddered, lagged, then heaved forward. Water swallowed a groan of timber like a crowd stifling a gasp. Lanterns on the far catwalk bobbed. Men shouted questions swallowed by distance. Ellie tapped Gideon's arm. Time to vanish. They sloshed through knee-deep snow toward town. Behind them, drifting logs bashed booms, chains snapped, and half the watch rushed to save lumber worth more than lives. The diversion ran like a fox ahead of hounds, drawing steel points away. Courthouse windows glowed faint amber. Gideon crouched beneath the drain pipe, palms braced on brick. Ellie knelt, laced hands for his foot. He tested the pipe. It held. He climbed 3 braces, reached back with the rope. Ellie looped it, boots scraping mortar, dress hem gathering slush. At the gutter, she swung lightly to the sill. Gideon hoisted the crowbar, wedged sash. Wood splintered with a sigh rather than a crack. They slid inside, boots landing on municipal dust. Corridor smelled of ink and old coal. Gideon pressed fingers against the clock on the wall. 2:09. Guard change at quarter after. He counted heartbeats, 1, 2, 3. Ellie moved ahead, skirt barely whispering, like night consenting to her passage. At the vault door she knelt, ear to steel while Gideon worked the dials. He broke each number with gentle turns, feeling Tumbler's seat. Perspiration dotted his brow. 4 numbers, then the hiss of release. They eased the door, cold air wafting paper and secrets. Ellie slipped inside first, eyes skimming labels. She found registry ledgers, volume 3, heft 2 recent. Gideon rummaged file drawers searching ballistic evidence. She opened volume 2, pages crisp, ink sharp. Her candle halo touched lines of ornate script, Arlen Voss's signature beside a bullet diagram, initialed affidavit attesting slug provenance recovered from David Hart's corpse. Her breath left in a ragged pulse. Gideon's whisper sliced the dark. Got the bond registry, names of railroad men. He turned, froze at her expression. No tear fell, grief had desert discipline. She handed him the page. He read, cursed under breath, more prayer than profanity. Boots clicked outside, guard late from river panic. Gideon shut vault door soft, slid ledger into canvas satchel, tucked affidavit inside his coat alongside Ellie's deed. She pointed to the side hall, 2 fingers, halt. Guard paused by front entry, muttering about water damage, then clomped off toward records office. Gideon counted 10 beats before motioning, move. They retraced steps. Ellie stepped onto gutter first, snowflakes swirling, breath white as cedar smoke. Gideon followed, foot slipping. She caught his coat, steadying him with surprising strength. Ground greeted them, softer than fear predicted. They padded behind the rectory, cutting east to the slope. In the churchyard shadow they finally breathed. Gideon touched the satchel, felt proof beating like a second heart. Ellie still clutched a single brass cartridge, warm from her pocket. River sirens wailed, the mill's emergency whistle blown continuous. Town lanterns dotted hillside like fireflies. Gideon examined Ellie's face in that glow, resolve etched deep, but something new shimmering, purpose bending sorrow into blade. He wanted to speak, found no words large enough, so he simply nodded. She nodded back. The pact held. They reached the cabin before dawn's first smear of indigo. Inside, Gideon set the satchel on the table. Ellie stoked embers. Orange light crawled over canvas, revealing Voss's elegant seal on the ledger cover. She traced it once, then lifted David's rifle from the wall. Chambered the cartridge she had carried all night. Gideon watched, saying nothing, while Ghost stepped back into shadows. Outside, wind shifted. The river's voice rose, timber grinding in slow, dangerous applause, herald to a day Dry Creek would not soon forget. Flames found the Hart cabin before dawn, slipping between chinks in the log walls like hungry snakes. Ellie jerked awake to crackling pitch and the reek of scorched pine. Smoke rolled across the rafters, blotting out the winter moon that glinted through widening gaps in the roof. She coughed once, hard, then flung a blanket over Gideon, dragging him across the plank floor while embers skittered around their boots. He staggered upright, blinked tears from his eyes, reached for the satchel, proof more precious than air, just as a crossbeam groaned overhead. He shouldered the bag. She snatched the iron deed box, tucking it into her coat like a heartbeat. Together they burst through the back door. Gusts fed the blaze, whipping sparks into the dark. Ellie spun, rifle raised, half expecting raiders in the tree line. Instead, a lantern dangled from a fence post 30 yards off, a single sheet of parchment pinned beneath, Judge Voss's seal waxed crimson. 2 words scrawled beneath the mark. Your move. Gideon ripped it free, crushed it in a fist that shook with fury colder than the air. He started early. He's not finished, Ellie said, voice scraped raw by smoke. Across town the school bell clanged at a frantic, uneven pace. No silhouettes passed behind the little windows. Ellie's stomach dropped. Gideon read her silence and broke into a run, boots slamming frozen mud. She followed, lungs burning. As they neared, a single door swung, banging in the wind. Chalk dust drifted across abandoned slates. A thick hemp rope dangled from a coat peg, cut, still swaying. A folded page lay on the teacher's desk, neat, lawyerly handwriting. Come to the mill before first light, or the children die. Bring everything. Gideon's jaw flexed. He shook ash from his cuffs, turned to Ellie. We go now. Her eyes flashed reflections of lantern glass and something harder. She glanced at the ledger protruding from his satchel. No time to bury truths. We carry them. They cut across alleys while roosters still slept, collecting whispers of alarm, parents stumbling from doorways, sheriff fumbling for boots, Mrs. Sutter muttering prayers that faded to sobs when she counted empty beds. Word spread Voss held the little ones. Some townsfolk clutched shotguns, others clutched each other, as if that might save them from the judge's doctrine. At the saloon, Silas Breen hunched over a mug of black coffee that steamed like a locomotive stack. Ellie dropped the ledger on the table. Pages fell open to entries threaded with his name: water rights revoked, wages garnished. He stared, color draining, then looked up at her, voice barely breath. He'd burned your home? Children for collateral, Gideon answered. You still cutting the main shaft? Breen's fingers tightened around the mug until knuckles blanched. Mill runs on that shaft. I stop it, logs break every belt. What if saws stall on their necks? Ellie leaned forward, eyes flint bright. You decide whether their necks meet blades or daylight. Choose quick. He slammed the mug down. South Catwalk's mine. 10 minutes. The mug cracked. Coffee bled across scratched oak. They moved. Ellie and Gideon led a scattered line of townsfolk, blacksmith, seamstress, even Tobias Pike, coat too big for his bony frame, toward the mill. They walked in hush broken only by the crunch of frost beneath boots and the distant creak of timbers settling under snow weight. Each carried what they trusted: rifles, axes, lanterns, courage born overnight. The mill rose against dawn's indigo, its tall stacks vomiting steam that blurred the sky. On the high carriageway, Judge Arlen Voss stood immaculate, black coat rippling stiffly. Beside him, 5 boys and 3 girls huddled, wrists bound to rail posts. A saw carriage slid inches from their feet, teeth gleamed, wet from oil, waiting. Ellie stepped forward into lantern glow, rifle low but ready. Gideon flanked her, satchel's strap dug into his shoulder. Voss amplified his voice through the void like a preacher addressing sinners. Mrs. Pike, Mr. Pike, I see you brought company. Fine. Set the satchel in the yard, step away, and these young souls walk free. Gideon called back, tone calm as a gambler's ante. Safe exchange. Release the children, you receive the papers. Voss lifted a fuse cord knotted to dynamite at the carriage's base. I negotiate from strength, agent. The word dripped disdain. Gideon's eyes flicked to Ellie, 3 finger taps on his thigh. Stall. She nodded. Behind the judge, Silas Breen's shadow climbed the south catwalk ladder, monkey wrench glinting. He eased toward the main shaft coupling where raw power spun at chest height, noisy enough to mask guilt. Ellie raised her voice, steady yet brittle. You shot my husband under cover of deed transfers. Own it, Voss. End this. Voss tilted his head, as if appraising livestock. Your late spouse resisted lawful repossession. Tragic. He tugged the fuse between fingers, felt its promise. Gideon unslung the satchel, cracked the leather flap just enough for sunlight to kiss the ledger seal. Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, proof visible, justice near. Voss's pupils narrowed. His free hand lifted a revolver, cock clicked audible even over river rage. Close the bag. Slide it forward. Breen braced the wrench, sweat dotting his temples despite the chill. Ellie met his gaze across the yawning machinery pit. Now? He slammed the wrench down. The shaft shrieked, metal shrilling against metal. Belts whipped loose, saw carriage jolted mid-advance. Ellie seized the moment, rifle leveled. Parents surged, pulling children away from slumping posts as the judge jerked his gun toward chaos. Gideon sprang, knocking the fuse from Voss's hand. Sparks skittered harmlessly into wet sawdust. 2 of Voss's deputies fired from the gantry. Wood splintered near Ellie's boot. She dropped, rolled, returned a shot that winged one man's shoulder, sending him spinning. Gideon grappled the judge, their boots tangled on slick planks. Voss fought like a cobra, quick, deliberate strikes, eyes cold. Gideon's wounds slowed him, but anger lent speed. They crashed against the control lever, releasing stored pressure. Steam hissed, clouding them in white. Ellie dashed across the carriage, cutting ropes with her hunting knife. A girl no older than 10 sobbed once, then clamped her teeth against the sound, courage mirroring the widow's. One by one, children dropped to their bellies, slithered towards safety under the railing. From the steam cloud came a bark of agony, Gideon, voice deepening to a growl. Voss emerged, coat torn, lips split but gleaming satisfaction in his gaze. He vaulted the railing onto the sluice walkway, a narrow spine of wood arching over the river where floodgates churned. Gideon staggered after, hand pressed to bleeding temple. Ellie sighted down her rifle, breath fogging. Shot impossible, distance, fog, two shapes weaving. She held fire. Breen shouted over grinding gears. Gate release flush him. Gideon shook his head once, no. He needed Voss alive with confession, not dead by current. Ellie's finger eased off the trigger. The judge reached the midspan, spun, fired twice. Bullets whined. Gideon ducked behind a sluice wheel. Voss dashed on, disappearing into the mist where walkway met forested bluff. Gideon lurched but stayed, checking mill below, children safe, townsfolk swarming. He slumped against railing, lungs heaving clouds. Ellie crossed catwalk, boots thudding. She pressed cloth to his head. He winced but managed a half-smile that held equal parts apology and promise. Below, townspeople dragged the wounded deputy inside for bandages. Others cheered Breen as he shattered the fuse detonator with his wrench. Snow began to fall again, flakes fat and slow, as if sky grew weary of violence. Ellie looked toward the dark treeline where Voss vanished. The ledger still lay in the satchel at her feet. She lifted it, feeling its pulse. Gideon's hand covered hers. His voice ragged but certain. We end this at dawn. Her eyes replied with fire that asked no permission. The wind shifted, carrying the river's applause. Each icy clap avowed that Dry Creek's reckoning had merely delayed, not disappeared. A pale river mist curled across the mill yard, glinting silver where dawn scraped the horizon. Gideon's boots sank in sodden sawdust as he followed the wet footprints Voss had left, one after another, deliberate, unfaltering, leading onto the narrow sluice walk that bridged to the log channel. Water thundered below, half-frozen, black and hungry. Ellie came astride behind, rifle low, heart knocking hard against the ledger pressed flat inside her coat. Frost hissed beneath every footstep, ice crystals burst like tiny stars. Ahead, the judge's silhouette paused at the sluice gate wheel, coat whipping in the river wind. He spun the iron crank 2 full turns, sluice boards shuddered, and a new surge of water sprayed up into dawn light. He neither looked back nor hurried. The man manipulated floodwaters with the serenity of a banker lifting a pen. Gideon called out, voice raspy but even. Running won't erase ink on those pages. Voss rested both hands on the wheel, still turned toward the river. Ink is merely memory, he said, words gliding on vapor. Water washes memory clean. He spun again, metal screeched, current roared louder. Ellie braced her stance. Another quarter turn and the whole channel rips loose. Towns downstream. Collateral breeds discipline, Voss replied, still calm. Gideon stepped onto the final plank span. Beneath him, the walkway groaned as icy water slapped uprights. He lifted empty hands. You win nothing, drowning Dry Creek. Ledgers stand ready for federal court. Voss finally faced them. Morning painted his spectacles blood orange. Courts feed on ledgers I write, he said, lifting his revolver just enough to show intent, not panic. Slide that satchel over, agent, or I drown your confessions alongside you. Gideon perched the bag on the plank, nudged it forward with a boot. Ellie's eyes tracked every movement, finger resting but not tightening on the trigger. Gideon's voice floated steady. 2 more minutes, sun clears the bluff. Rail witnesses will see you. Think. Voss smiled thinly. Witnesses are born blind when paid in timber stock. He stooped, opened the satchel with one hand, revolver never wavering. Pages gleamed. He touched the ledger spine as a priest might a sacred text. Clean burn, dry tinder, he murmured. From the mill yard came a sudden clang, Breen striking the brass emergency bell 3 times, the agreed signal. Gideon's gaze flicked to Ellie, she shifted half a step left. Under the walkway, he released a hidden rope tether. It slithered through his palm, sluice gate gears biting water harder. Level rose another inch, unnoticed by the judge, whose focus narrowed on the pages he planned to destroy. Gideon spoke again, softer. "You're a clever man, Arlen. Clever enough to know current math." He tapped his boot heel on the plank. The vibration carried through soaked timber. "Gates at full raise flood this span first." Voss's brows pinched, fraction of doubt. Ellie caught it. She said nothing, only let the river's growl answer. Another tether slipped free, water surged, licking the walkway edge, boards quivering under fresh weight. Voss swung the revolver toward Gideon's chest, finger tightening. Ellie's rifle cracked once. The bullet struck the handwheel's collar, sparks spitting. Metal jammed mid-turn. Voss reacted too late. Gideon lunged, shoulder barreling into the judge just as water sheeted over the planks. Wood rolled under them. Both men crashed, skidding against the rail where river spray lashed faces and swallowed curses. Revolver clattered, spinning into the channel. Gideon pinned Voss's wrist, twisting until bones threatened to snap. The judge fought with quick, vicious jabs, knuckles finding Gideon's wound, reopening the stitch. Blood surfaced dark against flannel. Gideon gritted his teeth, shifted weight, drove Voss's arm into the sluice wheel spokes. Metal bit flesh. The judge hissed, strength wavering. Ellie advanced, water soaking hem, muzzle trained. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "The man who shot David Hart sits before me now." The rifle's hammer clicked back, the only sound louder than the river. Gideon looked up, eyes pleading for restraint without a word spoken. Water kept climbing, planks beginning to float. Beneath them, logs nudged uprights, blunt battering rams itching for release. Voss spat blood, laughed, a sharp crack of ice splitting. "Pull it, widow. Become the outlaw you pity." Ellie's shoulders squared. She drew breath through cold that sliced lungs, thumb easing pressure on the hammer, but her gaze drifted to the children huddled safe on the mill bank, parents ringing them close, Breen holding a lantern high in the growing light. Their faces waited, some with anger, some with hope, all with need. Ellie exhaled, lowered the rifle, engaged the half-cock. "You'll see justice the long way." Voss sneered. "Law bends to those who pay its tithe." "Not today," Gideon said. He snapped steel cuffs around Voss's wrists, chain biting deep. "Pinkerton authority, witness signatures inbound." He hauled the judge upright, water swirling at their shins. Ellie stepped in, shouldered Voss's other side. Together they edged along the trembling span, river thrashing louder behind, as though furious its sacrifice ended short. Sun broke over the bluff, flooding the yard with gold knives of light. Whistles blew, rail clerks on the siding witnessing three silhouettes crossing the bridge, a shackled tyrant between two weather-worn guardians. Parents hushed children. Mrs. Sutter dropped her Bible, tears steaming on cold cheeks. Breen levered the main shaft, machinery easing to silence. Dry Creek inhaled as one battered body. At solid ground, Gideon signaled the sheriff, who stepped forward timidly with iron keys he never used for a man of rank. Ellie passed the rifle to Tobias Pike, nodded once. She knelt, opened the satchel, withdrew the ledger, held it aloft. Sun gilded its edges, a scripture of greed now free to speak. Murmurs spread, turning to voices, to shouts for account, to prayers of thanks, all braided into a single rising chorus that drowned the receding river roar. Gideon swayed, Ellie caught his elbow. Blood seeped through his hastily wrapped shoulder, yet his smile cut through weariness. "Owe you a roof," he muttered. "Build it straight," she answered, eyes never leaving the fallen judge being led away. "Build it honest." A train whistle carried across winter miles, long and low, promise of federal custody waiting. Voss stiffened at the sound, but the townsfolk parted without sympathy as deputies marched him toward the siding. Free hands touched Gideon's back, Ellie's arm, thanks offered in shy grips. Children clustered, eyes wide and bright. Snow began again, gentle this time, softening charred ruins on the ridge where Ellie's cabin had burned. She watched flakes settle on the deed box peeking from her coat, then up toward Gideon, who stood with ledger hugged to ribs like a veteran clutching regimental colors. Together they faced the pale sky. No vows exchanged, no grand speeches, only the slow intertwining of two steady breaths in frigid dawn, and the sure knowledge that memory would not wash clean but could, at last, begin to heal.